Welcome, everyone. I see everybody's joining in. Hello, hello. Got a few more minutes here while we're getting going. Everybody excited for tonight's presentation? I see one person shaking their head yes. We've got the chat open here if anybody wants to. I see another person clapping.
So David, I just jumped in and started sharing my screen already. I'm going to guess that's okay.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. I'm going to play around with stuff. So because I can't remember how to do it, so I can make the slideshow play and still see people. So if somebody has their video window on, I can still like feel like people are with me, you know? So I'm going to try for that. Let's see if it will. Yeah. Oh, okay. Hey, it worked. All right. All right. I can do that. So if you decide to keep your video window on, I might see you as I go through, but otherwise I will not. So like the virtual windows for people that have their camera off, I'll come back and see you after I close my file. Yep.
Hello, Mauricio. And Heidi. Okay, we got one more minute by my clock. And hello, Mario. Hello, Mario. All right, I've got that it's time, so welcome everybody. We have Diane Neubauer here going to present on ways for using the target language to increase student engagement. She has tons of experience with teaching Chinese and a strong background in various teaching practices, particularly on using the target language in your class. So on that note, take it away.
Okay. I just had a lot of echo from my side when David was speaking, so I wonder if it's doing that for others.
I will mute myself so that we don't have that problem.
Okay, that will solve it then. Okay, yeah. Great. So thank you so much for coming today. I'm really honored to have you interested in this topic. What you're seeing on screen right now is a couple of photos from research I did in finishing my PhD. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things I learned from there, but I'm also speaking from my own experience as a language teacher. So we'll get right into target language tactics for increasing student engagement. So I have an ambitious plan and I have a clock right above my screen so that I can stay on track. So I'm hoping to give a little time for questions and answers at the end. If there's something that comes up along the way where it would make it really hard for you to understand what I meant in that moment, please go ahead and add that to the chat. And David, if you would come on mic and make sure I fix that kind of question. If it's something that's like a good follow-up to the whole presentation, I'll wait till the end for most of those. So I'll first do a little introduction to myself and to my thinking about this, some things I'm going to take for granted that you might already know. And then we'll talk about how comprehension by the students is key in two different ways in thinking about engagement and target language use in the classroom. And then we'll talk about how questions give our students opportunities and how our students' responses to questions give us as teachers opportunities and how we can really maximize both and keep a synergy going. And then I'll talk briefly at the end about some advice about learning these tactics, because I think teachers are extremely hardworking, and here you are on your off hours. So you just proved it by being here tonight. So who am I and why do I know something about target language use and student engagement? I've learned, and I used to think this way myself, before I had a PhD, when I saw that doctor thing, it meant like, do you really know what a K-12 classroom is like? I want to tell you, I do. I taught for 10 years in K-12 Chinese language teaching. I taught elementary, a little bit of really young kids in an after-school program for just part of a year. And mostly I taught fourth grade through 12th graders. I also have been very involved in an ACTFL as a volunteer with the comprehension-based communicative language teaching special interest group. I was an officer for 4 years with that. And I like to attend ACTFL, and I've been in training about proficiency and language development from an ACTFL perspective. I'm also involved in other kinds of teacher training in summer conferences, some hosted by Voces, and love doing that kind of thing. So I enjoy working with teachers and thinking about the nitty gritty of how we make our practice really thrive and see good results for our students. And then I was so into it that I went back and got a PhD in that. So in 2017, I got started at the University of Iowa and finished my degree in 2022. And I am now teaching at a couple of different universities part-time. I'm also continuing to teach Chinese language classes online. And I've been doing online classes since 2017. So it's not the same entirely as teaching K-12 learners in a classroom where they didn't choose you quite so much as if they sought me out as an online teacher. But it's keeping my hand in teaching because I value it so much. So introduction to what I'll be talking about. Some of the things that I'll take for granted as I talk is that your goal is for students to develop language proficiency or to acquire language, and not just to be able to analyze language. So I'm thinking about communication, comprehension, language in use in the classroom. That's the kind of goal. Rather than maybe a more traditional program where you're studying grammar, you're analyzing grammar, you're identifying forms of language. So I'm going to take for granted that your goal is to have students able to interact in the language, to understand language that they encounter. And then I will also take for granted that you know some techniques to help make language comprehensible to your students. I don't have time in this short webinar to be able to discuss that in depth. I will, if you have questions about that, I could point you in directions to help you find resources if that's the thing that you come away with this webinar thinking, I'm not sure I have that piece down as well as I want. So that I'll take for granted some of that. There are also two important areas to make target language use and student engagement really work in a classroom, but I don't have time to talk about it today. And that's instructional activities. How do we structure an activity so that we really further target language use between the teacher, the students and other students? If you ask a question about that at the end, I have a couple of ideas for you, but I won't be able to go in depth. I also won't be able to talk too much about classroom management, which is really critical to making this work. And so I highly recommend, if you're thinking, but my students aren't engaged in class because they're always talking to each other, or I'm not able to get their attention, or they just aren't even with me to hear me ask a question, that sounds like a classroom management issue and something for another training. So I'm presuming that these things are kind of in the mix. And interesting, what happened to my slide here? There we go. My next point would be that comprehension is key in two different ways. One that might be on your radar, thinking, well, target language use, that's what the TL stands for. The language that I want my students to gain from my class, they need to understand that as it happens in the class. So a lot of us are thinking that way. We're thinking about comprehensible input. We want to have students understand that language, but sometimes I find, and this was true for myself, was that I also needed to make sure students understood how to participate, especially if this kind of interactive class where there's a lot of language going on, they're understanding, they're responding, they're involved moment by moment in encountering language they understand. That's different from their other classes. So if you think about a science class that they're in, they're looking maybe, it depends on the teachers and the way they're doing it, but in some other classes, they're looking to be graded on what they don't know, or they're looking for, oh, I don't know something, so I'm going to avoid engaging because if I make a mistake, it's going to be embarrassing, or the teacher's going to call me out, or I'm going to get corrected. If they know that the way to participate is by responding at whatever level of confidence they have, that a head nod is participating appropriately at times, giving you a look like, I don't think I understand what's going on, that is a way to participate. If you make clear that all of that counts, that might help in getting more participation from them. It also helps them to know if your goal is really getting accuracy or if it's just we're getting communication going in our classroom. We want to understand each other, but we don't want to really get too nitpicky about accuracy for its own sake. So if they know that participating has that whole range of showing their comprehension, of volunteering answers, of speaking as they have proficiency developing to be able to do, that might be helpful. Also, in the actual, the instructional activity you have, are you just asking them to tell you facts they already know, or things that, are you quizzing them on what they know, or are you asking them to imagine or share an opinion or give you information that you as the teacher don't know yet? Sometimes students are lost in the mix. They're used to school and playing the school game where it's about accuracy and what do you know and displaying what you know. So if you're looking for something that's more, tell me your own experience, give me an opinion, give me an idea that's creative and new, make sure they understand the difference. Like, oh, right now I'm just asking for review about the story we had yesterday, versus, okay, now we're reading something and I want to hear where you're curious. What do you see in the picture that you don't understand? This kind of thing. So making sure they understand the framework for how to participate in a specific time as you're interacting with them. So to talk a little about the research that I did, I'm really interested, as you might notice, in classroom interaction and how to make that really work and thrive in a world language classroom or an ESL classroom. And so in the study I was doing, I was looking in a particular area of what I saw in 3 different novice level Chinese language classrooms. There were middle school and there were high school classrooms. All of them were in their first year, or they were at a novice level of proficiency. Some had more experience. So I was looking at everything that the teacher and the students did, and there's lots of activities. Some of them might not be all that high in target language use. So I was looking for those that were really strong prevalence of target language. But sometimes that might mean the teacher is talking, but the students don't show things that I can tell are engagement. So I was looking for engagement from students and in a variety of ways. So one of the sources I drew on in defining engagement was multifaceted. So emotional engagement, cognitive engagement, behavioral engagement. So like if somebody goes, like this, but they didn't do anything, I'm seeing some emotional and behavioral response. So, and then social engagement. So are they looking at other classmates? Are they looking at you? Are they showing some sort of recognition of the people around them? And then I was also looking for evidence of student comprehension of the language that they encountered. And so these different things might simultaneously show both engagement and comprehension, but it's a little slippery. It's a little bit tricky. So what I was doing was really honing in on this and then analyzing what happened in those moments of interaction. So I will share from what I learned kind of as a big summary from all that experience. And then also I'll share some ideas from just the way that I have taught as well that I think aligns with what I found. So opportunities that our questions can give to students. So questions, there are a variety of types of questions. If you've ever had training that talked about circling, circling is an idea of a way to ask different kinds of questions about one very tightly controlled set of language. Maybe it's a sentence, maybe it's a phrase, but you're asking lots of different kinds of questions. That's one way to think about questions. I'm thinking a little bit differently about it. So I'm thinking about using a variety of kinds of questions to build an ongoing discussion with your students. And I'll call that topic development. So any kind of question, you want to think about what comes next. So this is different from something I'll call ask and drop questions. Here's an example. So class, how are you? Good. Today we're going to, and they explain that. Okay, class, we're going to find out about colors. Who has a blue shirt? Okay, you have a blue shirt. Okay, who has a red shirt? You have a red shirt. Okay, who has a white shirt? It's, there's sort of a little bit of development of a topic, kind of. It's all mentioning color words and shirts, but it's kind of ask and drop. You found out an answer from a student, but you just dropped it. You didn't continue with it. You didn't respond to it. So I'm going to suggest that we don't want too many questions that are going to be this ask and drop type, where we toss out a question and really what we're maybe focused on is can they accurately answer, rather than we're building a topic, we're learning about each other, we're talking about a subject, we're continuing to develop this. So what I was seeing was more engaging when I was observing these students was when students had a role in developing the topic. And they could do this in a variety of ways, but that's the next section of this talk. So we're doing something different from ask and drop. We're also doing something different from only fact-checking questions. Fact-checking questions, sometimes there's a technical term and it's not coming to mind. Display questions. Display questions are another way to say this. So if you've had training where they talk about this, the idea is that you already have something that everybody knows, and you're just asking for questions to make sure that they know that. It could be checking for accuracy again. It could be checking for comprehension though. Do they know what these words mean? Can they give me an accurate answer? So now I think they probably understand that word. So there's a legitimate place for doing that kind of fact-checking question, but you don't want to only do those because then students aren't contributing in any way towards topic development. It's just the teacher controlling the topic of the question and just very minimally taking something back from students. So you want to be able to, here's a way that fact-checking questions could go that I would really love. Let's say you had an article you read the day before in class, and you open the next day's class where you start asking some questions about the article. So wait, we were reading, was it about Bolivia or Argentina? Right, it was about Bolivia. It was not about Argentina. Now, when we were looking at the article, who was the person we were focused on? And now I'm going to show my ignorance of Bolivia because I can't name someone from Bolivia offhand. But if I were a Spanish teacher, I probably could. So the students tell me something about the person who was featured. I'm like, right, it was that person. Okay. And they were talking about their favorite hobby. right? Was that the topic of the article? And they're like, yeah, or they're no. And you're like, oh, you think it's different? So you're doing a little bit of fact checking there, but then you sum it up by saying, great. So today we're going to build on that by getting to compare that person to a new article about someone from Argentina. So you're checking these facts as kind of a way to review it in order to be able to do something with that information again. So hopefully that seems clear. Again, I think that's helping us develop a topic through our questions in the same way that I think it's very valuable. So even there, we're fact checking. Students aren't really contributing more than just to show that they recall some facts, but you're going to do something with those facts right away that they're going to be more involved in. They're going to be comparing to some new information. So I recommend that kind of thinking in terms of your questioning, thinking about it in terms of developing a topic with your students, building an ongoing discussion. You can ask questions from many different angles. So if you're right there in the moment working with students, some people write a script. That's absolutely fine to do. I tried that for a little while, and then I started to feel like, okay, I kind of get it. But looking at the way that interaction happened in the study I did really helped me to kind of categorize what are some of the sources from which a teacher could ask questions of their students that developed topics. And so one of those was appealing to your prior knowledge of the students. If you know, for example, you're doing calendar talk, starting off class, looking at what day is it, what's the weather like, and you know 3 of your students love rainy weather. This is something I saw a teacher do in the study I did. The teacher appealed to that, like, oh, look, will it rain today? Yeah. Oh, so and so, you like rainy weather. Are you happy today? And it gave an opportunity to keep building on the topic of the weather and draw in that student that they knew something about in a personal way. And another source of good question material could be students shared information right then. Let's say in that same example, the student is, that student was like, yeah, because it's super rainy. And somebody else goes, oh, and now they've just shared an emotional type of engagement, right? They are shocked. And so you can build on that, like, oh, I think maybe some classmates do not like rainy weather. Am I right? To the student over there, you're building on it right in the moment as the students share some information with you. Another source of questions can be encouraging imaginative ideas. In the case of the weather again, do you think that our principal likes rainy weather? Maybe your principal has to stand outside and greet students and families as the buses pull up and the parents drop off and things. I'm imagining. So, you can encourage those kinds of imaginative ideas from students. And then ask about students' interpretations and opinions, also about their experiences. So if they've just read something about a target language community, oh, you noted that they described this way of greeting. What do you think about that? Is it the same as something you've experienced? Does it feel different to you, or does it feel new? And helping to draw in their own experiences and opinions as you go. So I'm on track for time. For the 4th point, I want to think about opportunities that the students' responses give to us. We toss out the questions, and it gives them opportunities to contribute to the development of the topic, the ongoing use of the target language in the class. And by giving them those opportunities, we're giving them opportunities to be engaged and to show their engagement. And by being involved in the topic development that happens, students show us different kinds of responses. So what I saw in that study was a variety of different things. Let me move my slide around a little bit. What novice students did or could do, these are all different forms of engagement that I have listed over here. So the first one up in the upper right is multimodal responses. I always have trouble with that word. What I mean here, things that are not verbal, things that are maybe actions, body language, even things like eye contact or gaze, where are they looking? Hearing them go is a multimodal response to something. It might not necessarily even be the kind of response you hoped for or expected, but it's something the students have now given you, and you could use that. That it's showing a form of engagement, even if it's kind of irritated engagement. It's still showing that they're responding in some way to what you're doing, and you could use that in building on your next question, in responding to their responses. So that's multimodal responses. Another one that is sometimes not on our awareness level necessarily as language teachers is pausing by students. Sometimes we get a little anxious because students being silent could mean that they are totally disengaged, but it could mean they're highly engaged, thinking deeply, and need time to process for a few seconds. So watching for that kind of long pause and seeking to understand, now, do I think this is students resisting participating, or is this students who really need some deep thought time? And seeking to learn the difference is tricky, but worthwhile. So there's a lot of ways to show engagement multimodally. You could also be inviting students to do written or drawn responses, like on a whiteboard, on a piece of paper, on a document, or some sort of formative tech. And you can build on what they give you with that. They could be answering chorally, all as a class or as a large group. They could be answering individually. Maybe they raise their hand first so that you can hear each one's voice clearly when they respond. Or they give an individual response that's not verbal, perhaps, as well. And then what we traditionally think of as engagement, I think in a language classroom, sometimes we think very much in terms of verbal responses. I'm thinking of spoken language, but in a signed language, we're maybe thinking of them signing in ASL or another sign language that we teach. So we're thinking of using verbal responses in the target language that we teach. I want to include, though, verbal responses in their first language are also sometimes a sign of engagement. They may be so keen to get an answer out that they can't slow themselves down enough to think how to say that in the language that they're learning. But instead of squelching that or not treating that as a form of engagement or a good response, I'm going to recommend generally, unless it becomes a really big time consuming thing in the first language, I'm going to suggest that when they use their first language to respond, instead of using the target language to respond, you can still take that as their engagement, as their response, and you can then turn it into something in the target language. I'm thinking let me check my next slide. I might give the example now for that. Okay, I'll do it on this slide. This is good. So what teachers might then do in encountering all of those student responses, before they ask another question, you're going to be able to build a sense of rapport with students in some ways, but also to build topics by acknowledging the answers or the responses that they gave you. So what I mean is things like the student nods their head and you upgrade the student's responses. So student says this, and you restate it in the target language in a more complex way. Let me think of another example where we're trying to figure out a dog's name. We're making up a story, kind of like TPRS. We're creating the dog's name, and the student said, you've offered, how many people want to have the name Brownie for the dog? And you get a student nodding their head there. And you say, oh, I see. Jake, you'd like to have the dog's name be Brownie. Is that right? So I upgraded his response. And then I asked another question, a simple question, just a yes, no, did I understand you right? So I've been upgraded that very simple minimal response from the students and made it into something that's a new target language opportunity. I've also legitimated his head nod counts in this classroom. So it's likely, I think, that other students are going to realize that what I do in here, the teacher counts, like it matters, and it might be used to develop the topic we're discussing. So I think it's really encouraging to students when we can do that. Tag questions, I just gave that, inadvertently added a tag question on my upgrade example. So if you have the student, they nodded, you've got, oh, you'd like the name of the dog to be Brownie, is that right? Is that right? Is a tag question. So by asking this really simple yes, no, is that it? Did you mean this or that? Like that kind of question stuck on the end of something you've said in the target language gives it back to the student. They could tell you, that's it, you got it. Or they could be like, no, maybe the teacher misunderstood them. It gives them back a little piece of control in where the topic is now going to go. So we listen for their response or look for their response. Let's say the student with the dog and they want the dog's name to be Brownie. Student nods again. I'm like, oh, okay. Yes, Jake wants the dog's name to be Brownie. And I'm talking to the whole class again about that before going on to something else. So it's another opportunity to give just a quick piece of engagement right back to the student after you've restated something that you've learned from them. You can also compare students' responses. In that weather example, that happened in the classroom where I saw this example where they were talking about the weather that day. And the teacher remembered some of the students loved rainy weather. And then other students were like, ugh, like, so how many of you don't like rainy weather? Look, okay, there's how many? Wow, okay, so we have only a few people like rainy weather and many people don't. You who don't like rainy weather, what weather do you like? So now we're kind of starting to build off of just a simple thing, whether or not you like rainy weather, but by drawing out the comparison, we're using more of the target language. We're also helping students see that their reactions and their responses matter here, and we're going to build the topic based on what those responses were. We can also then compare to content. If we're looking at pictures, we're watching a video, we're reading an article or looking at an infographic, any of that, we can ask questions and respond to students based on the difference between them and what they encounter in the content. We can also, through that, kind of mold their intercultural thinking so that their reactions are not simply yuck or weird, but it is something, oh, this feels different. This feels new. You're encountering something you haven't seen before. Great. So framing it in that way, I think it's even a contribution to intercultural competence. So let's say you have an infographic about people in the Francophone African countries and that which sports are the most popular there. I'm not a French teacher and I don't recall. I've heard something about this. I was going to say that it might be soccer or football, like the Europeans would say football and people in the US would say soccer. Let's say that's the first one. Like, okay, students in my classroom, we learned this. How about you? Do you also have that as your favorite sport? Oh, some do, some not. You can start building on that with finding out what the students have in comparison to some piece of content you've introduced. Okay. Some final ideas before we get to some question and answer time. Some advice for learning these tactics, for learning to use the target language with your students to open up opportunities through questions, to hear their responses or see their responses and build on those. How do you learn this if this is new or feels awkward or uncomfortable? As I'm talking about real-time interaction, and that can truly be challenging. You're also using a language that the students don't know as fluently as you do. And so you're having to think about what can they understand? What can they understand? So there's lots and lots of things going on as you are teaching. So how do we get better at learning these things? First point I would make is to be kind to yourself. So wherever you find yourself to be, at this point, just accept accept yourself as where you are now, and that kindness, not a sense of pressure, not I'm doing it wrong, not that kind of talk, but being kind to yourself. I'm a teacher who learns and grows. I want to be kind to myself. I'm learning something new. I'm going to give myself a lot of grace and maybe go out for dinner at the end of the week as a reward or something. Like, be kind to yourself. Also be curious. You may, in just hearing some of these ideas, you may already be having the wheels turn about what am I doing now in my classroom? You might, though, just taking, along with kindness, take off the sense of judgment and put on a sense of curiosity. Like, what is happening in my classroom right now? Reflect on that without feeling under judgment. And so that you can find the things that are going well now. And then you can take a next step that's going to build on what you're doing well now. So curiosity, actually, this is one of the things, like when I was a language teacher in K to 12, I feel like I had a lot of this kind of judgment on me. And was I doing it right? Was I doing it the best practices, all this kind of thing. Actual's target language use position statement, the 90% idea, the idea of using the target language 90% or more in the classroom with your students at every level of instruction. That can sometimes feel like this weight on you. So I had all that stuff as a language teacher. And as I developed being both a language teacher and a researcher, I started to have some of that perspective on being curious about what was happening and reflecting on what was happening without judging it right away, just seeking to see it and understand it and be kind to myself if I noticed something that was like, oh, I don't think I want to do that anymore. So that curiosity piece was really helpful for me, and I want to keep sharing it with you. Also try in a safe space first. Do you have a colleague who can practice some question and answer things with you? If you're finding it difficult, maybe you've done ask and drop all the time. You've always asked questions and you get an answer and you go, good. And then you don't build on what the student's response was, but you want to try it now. Try it with someone who's willing to play with you. Maybe a colleague at your school, maybe someone you know or have met at a conference that you have contact with, like, hey, can we get on Zoom or some other online meeting platform? And let's try doing it for 10 minutes this week. And then I'll let you know next week how it went with my level 1 students when I tried it with them. So rather than starting right away with your own classes, you might try it with other teachers first. It's also a good idea, I find, if you have a really cooperative class, maybe try them first. And don't put the pressure on yourself to do it all at once with every group. And then as you're starting to try things out in your classroom, keep on being kind to yourself. You might find new kinds of classroom management struggles result from trying to do this kind of interaction with students. And trying to really rely on what they contribute in the class to build topics and to let them show engagement in new ways. So keep on being kind to yourself as you find these things are unfolding. So my summary is to kind of put on this idea of asking questions as being a way to develop topics with your students, and thinking about your responses from students as adding to that developing topic with them. So just keeping it going as much as you can or wish to, given the instructional activity you've chosen and the time you have. Thinking about engagement, that it takes many forms. You can encourage all the kinds of engagement by responding to it and treating it as something that's relevant to that developing topic. So if students nod, if they shake their head, you're putting into words and you're acknowledging what they've contributed. If they're speaking in full sentences, you're not only thinking, wow, that's a great sentence, and you might congratulate a student, but you're also building on it and showing through the way that you respond to students all the kinds of engagement that they can give in the classroom are all good, and you're welcoming all of it. And then finally, just thinking about being kind to yourself as you're trying something new. And there we go. My slide did not go. This is a little bonus thing. I can't show you the video, but I'll put the video link if you're interested into the chat. If it's fun for you, this is me with some wonderful friends doing an interpretive dance of my dissertation research study about classroom interaction. And so it's in interpretive dance, it would reinforce the topic of this webinar if you care to see it on YouTube. So I'll put that link into the chat in a moment after I stop sharing screen. So thank you again so much for coming. And I do have several minutes for questions as I was hoping. So I will stop share and I will make sure I get that link into the chat. And David, was there anything that you noticed already that I should address from a question?
Not yet. We got most of the questions covered. Definitely great time to start commenting if anybody has any ideas.
Yeah, questions and comments, I should say, are both welcome. So. I saw one comment was very clear. So great. Let me toss an idea out, and I will see in the chat if you want to use the chat as a response. So I'll give you a hypothetical. So you have, let's say you have just asked a question and you're waiting for the responses from students, and you get 3 students nod their heads and others are kind of looking around. What do you do next? So you've asked a question as a yes, no. Some, like a few students in the classroom are nodding their heads, and others are kind of looking like maybe a little confused, or they're just kind of looking around like, what's going on? What do you do? So I see, okay, repeat the information in some way. Yes. Yes. Getting a choral response by counting to 3. Maybe they're hesitant to say something or to do more than just a head nod because they need a countdown for some think time and the safety of answering as a whole group. That's a great idea. Repeat the question. Ask for some information, maybe narrow the question. So if it was a yes, no, maybe they didn't understand. So you want to rephrase it or break it down into parts. And try again and see if you get like a little bit more response that time. Someone else suggests head nodders. If you see some of the head nodders, you're responding to them like, I see you've responded as a yes. How about you? Yeah, so you can draw someone in individually. Do you think the same way? That kind of thing. And let's see, looking for some other responses there. Yeah, I'm seeing other comments as well, so I'm getting a little lost in that. But someone else suggested talk to a partner, answering with a partner first, and then going back to developing that with the whole class. I have learned that later in my teaching, and I like that. Let them get that out with a classmate where they might feel a little safer, and then get some responses from the whole group again. So someone's noting that she would be automatically drawn to the head nodders. And so ask follow-up to them, but maybe first focus on those who might be confused. I think that's a strong response. So we're trying to keep them all engaged at the same time. Maybe the pause is, I noticed those 3 students, but I see 20 who didn't do anything yet. So we're going to solve that. And then we're going to go back to those 3 students who nodded and build on their response. Once you see that the whole class has been fixed, like they've got it, they know how to respond. Again, that silence, that lack of response can sometimes mean they don't know what your expectations are for the interaction. Like So is it language comprehension? Is it instructions for what you're expecting them to do? So let me go back and see other questions. So thank you for engaging with that one. I think those are great, great thinking through those things. Can I suggest some strategies to develop cultural competency with interactions? In big picture ideas for that are the kinds of materials you use and the kinds of questions you ask as you use those materials. So I personally have lately been aiming for about 50% something based on the students' culture or students' imagination and the things that they contribute to, as the kind of topic we're talking about. And about 50% of the time, something that comes from the target language communities in some way. Could be a photo, could be a short video clip that we'll do something with, an infographic, an actual reading, a legend from a story from the target culture, or cultures. So I'm trying to do some of both so that they are learning from both sources, both their own familiar cultures as well as target language communities. I ask some of the same questions, but because they're encountering some content from target language communities, we can start to develop cultural competency. Let me scan through there. Someone asked about, do I write all of my TPRS stories? No, I don't write any of them. I do them with students. So no, I don't. This is the other thing about this. You're able to build topics with students based on things that they're giving you. And so let's say you want a story that's a little more structured. It's totally fine to have a prepared thing that you're just asking them about their opinions, comparing to their experiences, doing just a little bit maybe of imaginative work with them. If you're doing a full TPRS story, I think the imagination of the students and the contributions they give is how you develop the story. So you're developing the topic through that. So I think that's a more advanced level of teaching, actually, to go kind of that free form. If you use, actually, I closed my last slide. I had 3 types of activities that I saw when I was doing the research that I've referred to. 3 types of activities in those classrooms. So I'm not saying this works in every classroom, or that these are the only things that work, or that these are the thing that does target language interaction effectively with a lot of student engagement. Just that I saw it in these 3 classrooms, it became prominent. So one of them was personalized questions and answers, or story asking. So where you're asking questions where the teacher doesn't know the answer yet, because the students are going to either make it up or share it about themselves. Also, things like small talk of various kinds, calendar talk, talking about the weather, the day, those things were places where they really developed topics and students were contributing ideas. And then the third one was discussing a text. So a text could be a picture, a video, something they read, an infographic they're looking at, all of those. So that one is really, I think, a great place to start, because if you've not done this with students, it feels a little loose and freeform. That can help tie you into something that's going to keep you on track. You can keep talking about the next section of that picture, or another picture that's related but new. And so it gives you some scaffolding for you as a teacher as well as for your students. Someone asked about a big range of proficiency levels. I think the kinds of questions that you ask are going to vary. Occasionally, like I have some mixed groups at this point in time in my online classes, and sometimes I just let them know that I expect that there's a variety of proficiency levels, and I want to make sure everybody can engage, like you can follow the topic of what's going on, but I don't necessarily expect everybody's at the same point of readiness to speak in complex sentences. And some people might pass over some details as we go, but they're getting the overall flow of what we're talking about. That's I would want to make sure everybody had that much, at least. And then being able to ask a more advanced question to students that are showing higher proficiency can be helpful. If it's as different as, this is a heritage speaker whose family speaks my target language in their home all the time, versus a brand new beginner, that is a really challenging type of place to be. And I feel like we need better class placement for that. But it takes more than just that. It's a question that I can't fully address because I see it's a little bit past the 45 minutes. Let's see if I see anything else there before we go. Someone noticed about that. If you're seeing maybe students are not responding, maybe it's a comprehension issue. Someone noted, maybe writing a keyword on the board, giving some scaffolding. Yeah, what does this mean in English as another way to see if students are hesitant to respond? So, yeah, mentioned follow-up about how to make the target language more comprehensible. One of the things that Voces does is training in the summer where it's really in depth about that. And so now am I going to get the conference right? I was there last summer and I'm trying to remember the name of the CI Summit. There we go. So CI stands for comprehensible input. I know that not everyone has that kind of thing, but if you're looking for blogs that are on that kind of topic, looking for comprehensible input in teaching how to make the target language more comprehensible, I've blogged there. And I sometimes have done things like I've shared videos from my Chinese classes on YouTube. So if you looked up my name there, you might see things that are happening that would be useful. In particular, I have some that are novice level Chinese classes. One is a series of short videos that is kind of a compilation of teaching my parents Mandarin Chinese for their first time. And so if you watch something like that in a language you don't know and take notes on like, what did the teacher do to help me understand? Those can be great sources for getting ideas. And I know that we're a little bit over time. Oh, and I see David has put in some links into the chat, so that's great. I don't think I missed too much in terms of questions in the chat. So David, do you want to take it from here?
Certainly. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will make the recording available. We'll send out a notice once we've got that posted up on YouTube with the link of where to find it. Absolutely thank you for joining us tonight on your time off. We're always happy to help. If you have any questions, feel free to send them over to us at info@vocesdigital.com. I'm just going to drop that into the chat here. So one more time, thank you, everybody. Definitely thank you, Diane. That was an excellent presentation, and enjoy your evening.
Thanks for coming.
Oh, nice seeing you.
Yeah, good to see you, Heidi.
David, I have a question.
I'm actually, yeah, go ahead, but I'm just gonna end the recording here. Just a moment.